Hey, and welcome back to Running Through Maya MASH Edition Episode 3 Thingamadilly. Anyway, we're going to be talking about visibility, strength maps, fallout objects, maybe some ramps. Let's just do things. Let's just do it. So, we've got these two objects. I've already grouped them nicely, so we're just going to go ahead and smash them into a MASH editor window thing. These are going to be called Stuff MASH. Let's go ahead and immediately add an ID node. Got a lovely little ring right there. Let's do it on a random. So we can put this to mesh. Let's do a nice random vertex. Let's flood the mesh when we get there. I've got this conveniently hidden plane. Woo! Okay. So under distribution, pull this guy there. And boom. We have stuff. Stuff is happening. You'll notice that they are kind of nicely the just up above the thing. But they're based on vertexes instead of faces. So let's try random faces instead and see if that. Yeah, now they're kind of up on top of it instead of poking through all the time. Not that that's stopping them entirely, but however, it looks better. So we shall persist and move on. Let's add a visibility node. This is going to let us apply a map. So let's open up our Hypershade and I will show you what kind of map I'm talking about. I'm going to be using a ramp today just to quickly and easily apply a black and white value to the strength map. It can be applied in any given direction, whether it's Y, X, or Z, or a UV. And in this case, if we supply a map helper object, it will apply it based on this object's UV map in accordance to this texture. So, if, it's a big if this works, you can play with the strength that the texture map is applied to, that the strength map is applied. You can also play with the randomness of how it's applied. But if you really want to play with how it's working, the best way to go is just to play with this slider. And this is a nice visual representation of of how this is working. So if we go here, you can kind of see that as it gets closer to the center, there's more pure white. So if we go back to our visibility and grab our texture and bring this all the way over to the right, see we just get a little bit more. We can see very clearly as I move white and get more pure white, we have more and more objects shown. So in your texture, anything that's white, pure white, will be shown, and whatever's black will be hidden, which allows you to get pretty creative with things. Take, for example, if we go back here, instead of a strength map, we select this texture, which unfortunately will also delete it from our object, and instead take our strength map and we apply a noise. You can see we get a fairly random across the board removal of objects. We have the threshold, it behaves a little bit differently. If we change the ratio so that it's a little bit more dynamically dark and bright, we get these kind of peaks and valleys. You can play a lot with this. And then when we remove this from view, we get this sort of like topological map situation of rings and gears. Very cool, in my opinion. Let's go back to our visibility map node. And we just finished talking about strength maps. It's basically taking a 2D image that's in black and white and using those values to apply an attribute of your node to your MASH network. In this case, it's whether something's visible or not. So you need a strong value of 0 or 1, corresponding with black and white, um, with 1 being showing everything, a white value showing things, and 0 value being the absence of color, and it not showing. Yeah, that seems like pretty good, whatever. So, fall off objects. We're going to go ahead and create a fall off object. It creates this sort of gyroscopy looking deal where anything inside of it is allowed to exist. If we invert that, if we go to our fall off object here, and we invert the fall off, it instead allows everything outside of it to exist, and anything that's within its boundaries will no longer exist. We can scale this object up or down. We can shrink it top to bottom. We can shrink it in any other axis. We can rotate it and have the shape of it affect it dynamically. And if we move this around, it automatically affects it. I'm going to go ahead and grab this MASH network here. And let's get our tear off. Not sure why that's missing now. And convert it to an instance so we can kind of affect our mesh a little bit quicker. So now you can almost see it in real time. Things are being shown and unshown in real time. Cool beans. If we go back to our visibility node and go into our fall off object, you have a couple options for your shape. You can do a sphere, you can work with a cube, you can work with a NURBS curve, particles, or even a mesh. We'll get to mesh very soon here. I'm going to go back to a sphere, and I think we're just going to kind of reset all of the record it. Well, about that. Let's go ahead and delete this, and we will just make another one because it's a lot faster than trying to reshape that one. So, create an object, go into its settings, invert the fall off. Beautiful. Okay, inner zone. This has to do with anything inside the inner zone is fully activated, in this case, removed. Anything within the bounds of the outer one is a percentage of that affected. So if we make this inner zone very small, like nearly zero, it would you'd have to be very far into here to be affected. But because anything besides a 1 means that it's off, pretty much anything that's in the outer bounds of this thing are going to be hidden away from view. This works a little bit better with rotation, something that can be like a float number. So why don't we go ahead and view that? Turn off our visibility node. We will delete this fall off object, and we'll add a random node somewhere. There it is. Let's give this thing strong rotational abilities. 360 across the board. Grab a fall off object and create it. So if we make it real big, like everything is random, right? If we make it just slightly bigger, you can see that everything is as normal except for what's inside the fall off object. We go in here and we randomize it, or if we invert it, everything inside of it is normalized, and anything on the outside is randomized. If we look at this inner zone and we bring it way down, you see that there is a percentage fall off of the rotational effect. If we increase the inner zone, we will see the rotational effect gradually get more and more strong until it reaches 1, meaning anything within the outer bounds will be affected 100%, removing all rotation. And anywhere we move it, will anywhere we move it will be immediately fully normalized. So if we get somewhere in like the 0.1, 0.2 range, we can see a dynamic range of rotation happening as we move this around, as opposed to just having on or off. So inner zone is pretty cool that way. These different modes, sometimes they matter, sometimes they don't. It's best to play with them and see what works. I've heard that add has some weird effects with it. So I would prefer if you use normal and inverted the fall off for certain effects, but I'm not your boss here, so you do what you want. Lastly, you can affect the gradient, or I should say like yeah, let's call it the gradient, from inner zone to outer zone. Right now it's just very simple, fully affecting whatever attribute you have it attached to not affecting it at all. This is not at all, this is fully affected. If you create I'm going to put these to spline just to make things kind of gradual. If you create a quick fall off, that means that everything, let's see, so this is fully affected, meaning this is all normalized immediately inside the inner zone. But as soon as you get past it, you have very, very little action. You have very little normalization happening just outside the inner zone. So you can play a lot. You can actually create like a second peak so that there's like a ridge of normalcy and then there's like another section of randomness. You can make some very interesting effects with this. Just like with all other ramps, it's all about how you create your curve. So have fun with it. Finally, we will talk about the mesh version. Let's grab a torus and scale it way up. There are some drawbacks to using a fall off object with a mesh. Chief among them is that the inner zone is practically non existent in terms of like usability. It does affect it, but it's not intuitive. And you'll probably have to play with this fall off ramp quite a bit before it actually makes any kind of sense. As you can see, it really doesn't do a whole lot. Typically, that has to do with the fact that the geometry of it isn't really conducive to calculating that sort of thing. But um, yeah, yeah. However, it does work, and you can see the outline of the torus moving around, affecting normalcy and randomness all around it. So I think it's pretty freaking cool that you can take a torus and you can like turn it up on its side and get like two cylinders of affecting area on a plane. Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna get picked up or not, but yeah. So you can use various mesh shapes to drive different attribute fall offs. Let's just stop there before I'm behind. Lastly, I guess we should probably talk more about ramps since that's what I teased. I guess we kind of covered it with that, didn't we? Hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna call this an episode. I think we're kind of good to go with that. We covered the fall off ramps. We covered, which sort of talks about ramps in general. They affect attributes, and they give you a visual way to distribute their effect over distance or whatever kind of value is appropriate for that. Went over all the different kinds of ways you can make fall off shapes. We went over how you can use strength maps, and we talked a little bit about the visibility node. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. And if you've got any comments, leave in the doobly doo below. I will see you next time. Bye bye.